Hello and welcome to NexTalks. I'm Nex, and this is where I talk. Today I'm going to be talking about eating your vegetables, the importance to your health of eating vegetables and other non-animal products, but we're also going to be talking about animal products and whether or not they are healthy or necessary for your diet. So brace yourself because this is going to be a challenging episode. I'm going to be challenging you to think differently about what you eat, why you eat it, and whether you need to eat it. So at the end of episode 7 of this podcast, I did allude to this upcoming episode because I was reading a book that I have since finished, and it's called Eating Animals. And in this book, they mainly focus on the treatment of animals and the changes in the farming industry and the fishing industry over the last 50 to 100 years. So let's start there, since this book is the inspiration for this episode and also some pretty huge changes that I've made to my own eating habits, my own diet, and my own mindset around food and what I eat and why. And I hope that you will have some changes as well, just from hearing about my experience. So start off by picturing a farm in your mind. What do you see? What does it look like? Who's there? For most of us, we picture a pretty outdated version of a farm. Most of us picture an old school family farm where a family and maybe a few hired workers are taking care of a large plot of land. There's crops, there's animals. The animals have shelter, but they also spend a lot of time outside. They eat grass and they experience their life within some boundaries as they're domesticated. But they can generally live a somewhat normal life for these animals, and they can participate in a lot of their natural behaviors. You might even imagine these farmers and their family developing fondness for some of these animals, and each of the animals having their own little personality, and the farmers kind of knowing each animal personally and being able to identify them, etc., etc. Unfortunately, today, this is becoming, slowly but surely, a thing of the American past. The vast majority of animal products that you consume are coming from factory farms, which are steadily and almost entirely overwhelming and dominating the farming industry. Something like 99% of our meat comes from factory farms. And these factory farms don't look anything like a farm, with the exception of the horrible stench that tends to emanate from these places. You might not even recognize them as a farm. They're big warehouses, and they're shoved full with animals. Some of them have no windows. They probably have a lot of machines that are there for ventilation to keep the animals from choking on the intense fumes of their own excrement, most of which they live in pretty close proximity with. The animals are not the happy chickens roaming the field that we may have pictured a few minutes ago, but instead probably have sores. They're going to look like mutants. Not only from the genetics that they are being bred for, that's going to give them overwhelmingly large breast meat that their legs can't even support and can oftentimes just have broken legs, and their beaks are cut off because they live so close side by side, basically on top of so many other chickens. We're talking like thousands of chickens in one little area, that they cut their beaks off so that they don't peck each other so much. And if they do, they aren't going to cause as much damage to the product. And that's really the moral of the story here, is that it's no longer this exchange of a safe and comfortable life in exchange for meat and eggs and dairy, etc. Now, instead, it's like we're viewing animals, living beings, as machines that exist solely to give us what we want from them. So we no longer treat them like living beings. We treat them as if they don't matter. We treat them as if their suffering is irrelevant because their only existence is for our food and for us to eat. But birds, cows, pigs, even fish have shown much more remarkable intelligence than many of us are even aware of. And they are conscious, and they do experience pain, and they do experience suffering, and we all just go day in, day out, supporting the torture and horrible, horrible living conditions of these animals. It is truly unthinkable. Most of us have thought about this before. This level of detachment that we experience between the food that we eat and how it gets to the local grocery store, which is where most of us get our food from. We don't have to raise the animal. We don't have to kill the animal, which is probably the worst and hardest part, I would hope, for the whole process. But we eat it happily. And many of us couldn't do that, even if we tried. Could we actually kill an animal and then take apart its body and actually cut it open, take out its organs, take off its skin and its hair, etc., etc.? Now, I don't intend to get too graphic with this episode. I'm not trying to traumatize you with all of the different stories of these factory farms. But just suffice it to say that there are some that believe that having to slaughter animals for a living can actually bring out a sadistic side. If someone has to spend their whole day, in a slaughterhouse, there's something called a kill line, which is where the animals kind of line up for their ultimate doom. And sometimes the machines don't do a perfect job, and there's people there who are backup, basically, to finish the job that the machines may have messed up. And these people have to be able to kind of detach and compartmentalize what they're doing from their ability to be a human and to have empathy and to be humane and to look into the eyes of another living creature and to end its life. And because of this, potentially because of this, there have been countless stories, reports, documentaries about the sadistic treatment, way beyond what we're talking about just in the straight up living conditions, the stuff that's actually sanctioned by the US government and is completely legal and okay to do. We're talking about above and beyond, people that are unnecessarily torturing the animals, apparently for the sheer pleasure of it, the satisfaction of it. They find it funny. Maybe one of the animals, is fighting for its life and causes some type of injury to them, or there's just a particularly, mean-mannered type of personality in a certain animal, and they want to get revenge on it or make it pay, and they will take out a lot of their aggression onto the animals. I would love to believe that this is not the norm, but it certainly happens, and it's important to be aware of as you go to the store and buy your meat. And I struggle to hold back on some of these stories because it's so important to understand, and the further you're shielded from it, the less likely you are to care, because ignorance is bliss. The less you know, the less responsibility you have to do something about it. So I really want to encourage you, if this kind of general information isn't enough to freak you out about what you're eating and how it's treated, I encourage you to dig deeper, look deeper. You can find something that's going to change the way that you think about this in this industry, and at least cause you to make a shift away from conventional meat towards organic meat, which is what I talked about in episode 7. But I learned more since then. So even organic farms, like we learned, they have to have access to the outdoors. They can meet this requirement by putting a door that's open sometimes on the side of one of these warehouses. Like I said, these animals are mutants. I mean, how easily are they going to be able to get past the other thousands of birds in there to get out the door? And how often is the door open? Do they know the inspections are coming? Do they, act differently when the inspector is there? Probably. Most businesses do. When they're getting inspected or audited by the government, they put on their best faces and they put their best foot forward. But even in these situations, some of the inspectors, there's certain parts of the slaughter process that they can't even see, and therefore they can't enforce any type of humane treatment. So there's tons of issues with the food industry. We talked about the unhealthy nature of a lot of these companies that are just focused on profits and not on health or safety. But now we're getting even further into it actually endangering the life of another creature and causing horrible suffering, unthinkable suffering. Not to mention the quality of that meat. They've actually found that because of the high levels of stress in these animals, it actually decreases the quality of the meat. So they build up like lactic acid in their bodies, and it starts to deteriorate their meat. So they try to sedate the animals to keep them from being too stressed. They've even tried breeding stress genes out of the animals so that they can subject them to high levels of stress without the animal responding to it, which has largely been proven to be ineffective because the amount of genes that are involved in the stress response are beyond what we understand at this point. So what we have today is a bunch of stressed out animals being shoved on top of one another. They are sometimes kept in complete darkness. Sometimes they're kept in 24 hours of daylight. They manipulate the lights to get the results that they want from the animals, particularly with chickens that lay eggs, because they're trying to, rather than letting nature do its thing, where the sun comes up at a certain time of the day and certain seasons of the year, and the animals have been evolving for thousands of years to work with the seasons and the cycles of nature, now we try to use artificial lighting to force them into ovulation much more rapidly than they would otherwise, so that they can produce more eggs earlier in their lives and for as long as possible. And the moment they stop laying eggs, they are no longer useful to us. All of the male chicks that are born to these types of facilities are just killed because they're useless to them. Plus, the conditions of a place like this are not very clean. So outside of being humane, do you really want to eat this meat? I mean, not only are you supporting an industry that's literally torturing beings for profit, but if you look into the actual process of getting that meat to you, there is a very concerning amount of diseases that go on with these animals. Also, they're usually all fed tons of antibiotics as a preventative measure. So not, one gets sick and you give it antibiotics. No, they're fed antibiotics regularly, potentially with every meal, before they ever show any signs of illness, to try to prevent illness, which may sound good in theory, but if you've ever watched the news or been outside of your own house, you've probably heard of antibiotic-resistant illnesses. It's something that's very concerning to physicians and epidemiologists, is these like kind of mutant viruses or bacteria that, particularly bacteria in this case, that are resistant to treatment. And there's not a ton that we know as to why this happens, but I'm sure pumping our meat full of antibiotics is probably not helping that case, and seems very, very likely to be promoting antibiotic-resistant type illnesses. So not only are they sick and sad and suffering, but they're also contaminated and potentially very unhealthy. So let's get into that. So if you don't care that the animals are suffering, maybe you at least care about yourself and your own health. So let's switch gears here and start talking about one of the number one complaints and arguments that I hear from meat eaters, which is that we have to eat meat, that we need meat for various reasons. One that I actually shared until recently in my research was worries about protein, not getting enough protein. And what I have found is that pretty much every single thing I've been eating has protein in it. Most vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes, which are basically beans, lentils, peas, chickpeas in particular, have protein. Some of them have pretty high levels of protein. So you're able to get all of the protein that you need from plant sources. And if you're really worried about protein, you can supplement with protein powders. They make really great vegan protein powders that taste just as good as the whey protein and avoid animal suffering. So why not? What excuse do we really have at this point to be causing animals to suffer? You know, when we were cave people, of course, we hunted, we caught meat, we ate it. I see no moral problems with eating meat fundamentally. The problems that I see is the way that we've evolved away from domestication and harmony with animals to treating them as if they are not living beings, as if they don't experience pain and suffering. You know, we've gone way too far in the wrong direction with this, and it's time to put our foot down and demand real change. And until that change happens, we have to be brave enough to stop supporting this industry with our money. That's it. You just stop buying it, you stop eating it, and they will change because all they care about is money. So they will change if they have to, but if we don't change, neither will they. So ultimately, a lot of this is on us. Which brings me to the new concept that I had never heard of before reading this book, which is selective omnivorism. So this means that you sometimes do eat meat, but only when you are confident and comfortable with the source, the raising, the treatment of that animal. In those cases, I say go right ahead. When my grandpa goes out into the woods and hunts a deer by sitting out there all day quietly waiting for one single deer to go by, has to land his shot, then he has to track the thing down, then he has to clean it and prepare it all himself, and then he wants to offer me some venison, I see no problem with that. So I'm not saying that it's wrong to eat meat. What I'm saying is that it's wrong what we're doing with the farming of meat. And I hope that's clear. Another concern about vegetarianism and veganism that I've heard and even have been worried about myself really up until today when I was researching for this episode is soy. So first, most soy is genetically modified. So we're going to take that off the table. Let's talk about what I would call real soybeans, non-GMO. These are organic soybeans. Organic foods cannot have any genetically modified organisms. So the reality about soy and soybeans is that it's very high in protein and it seems to be very healthy for people. But I've heard that it mimics estrogen in your body, so a lot of people get worried about that. They don't know what that means. Men are afraid to eat soy because they're afraid they're going to grow breasts. Now, first of all, most of these men out here eating all the meat have breasts anyway. Sorry. Crack myself up with that one. But aside from that, I looked into the science. I looked into research, and there is no scientific evidence of this at all. The reality is that soy contains something called isoflavones, and when we eat them, they convert to phytoestrogens, which are similar to estrogen, but there is no scientific basis for fear of this causing any kind of feminizing effects. I'm telling you, I found zero scientific basis for this fear. And if you're so worried about it, just don't eat a lot of it. I mean, you would probably have to eat such a large amount of tofu and soy products to have any type of impact on this in your hormones that it's really silly to even be worried about it. Honestly, to me, it kind of seems like something that would be promoted by big meat industries to try to discourage people from going vegetarian or going vegan. And 2012, just over 10 years ago, it was about 5% of Americans that were vegetarian. I mean, that's 95% of people that are contributing to this really nasty problem that we have. Earlier today, I was live and one of my viewers brought up the topic of amino acids. So I did some research, and now I'm going to give you more information about amino acids than you ever wanted. You're welcome. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and they are absolutely vital to a healthy life for a human. There are essential amino acids and there are non-essential amino acids. Non-essential just means that our body creates them themselves and we don't need to get them from our food sources. So we're not worried about that here. What we're worried about is those essential amino acids, the ones that we absolutely need, because these are important for so much of our bodies. It's not just about protein and muscles. I mean, this even goes into hormones and neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. So it's really, really, really important. However, pretty much any food that has protein is going to give us amino acids. So the essential amino acids are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. So yes, you can get these from meat, dairy, and eggs. However, you can get all of these amino acids. Trust me, I looked up each individual one. You can get them all from plant-based sources. So I did break down like the specific foods that give you the specific acids, but let's just look at them as a whole because there was a ton of repeats. Legumes are huge. That's beans, lentils, and peas. Nuts and seeds, specifically sunflower seeds, peanuts, cashews, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, soybeans, any whole grains, and even some vegetables. The one that was the strangest, I also forgot to mention brown rice as well. But one of the ones that seems to be one of the harder ones to get is lysine, which the only plant-based sources of it that I found in my very quick search were soybeans, fenugreek, and spirulina, which I found really interesting because spirulina is like an algae. It's very green, and I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be a source of an amino acid, but apparently it is. And that's great news for me because one of my favorite kombuchas is a pineapple juice and spirulina mix. So yeah, you can get all of the essential amino acids that you need from plants. Back in the day, we didn't have a global market. We didn't have access to pumpkin seeds and sesame seeds and whole grains and all these different legumes and chickpeas and all these different things. But now we do. So we no longer have an excuse. We're not being forced to torture animals anymore. So why are we still doing it? You can tell me it's because of the taste, but you're going to be pretty hard-pressed to convince me of that, considering how much seasoning and flavoring you have to put on most pieces of meat to make them taste any good. But speaking of kombucha, I did find something really interesting, which is vitamin B12, which is actually only found in animal products, can be derived from kombucha. And if you have just one serving of kombucha per day, you're getting more than 100% of your necessary vitamin B12. So the supplemental B12 is a vitamin that's connected to our energy levels. If we have low B12, we're not going to have a lot of energy. So this is very important. If you are going to go vegetarian or vegan, you have to supplement your B12 because there are no plant-based sources of it. However, the good news is that the supplemental version of B12 doesn't come from animal products. It's actually cultured from bacterias, so it's like a fermentation process, just like they use in kombucha. I didn't check this, but I would imagine any fermented foods probably contain some level of B12. So you can check for that as well, or you can just do it the easy way and just supplement with like a B12 tablet or something like that. And the reality is, study after study, year after year, has shown that people who eat vegetarian or vegan tend to have much better health than people who eat meat and animal products. So there's different options here. I talked about being a selective omnivore, which is pretty much how I identify myself, although I haven't found any good sources of meat or animal products, so I'm pretty much eating vegan at this point. Sometimes I'll eat dairy when I'm out because it's very difficult to find vegan options on most menus. Another good reason to start cooking more at home. We all know the benefits of eating more vegetables, more legumes, more whole grains. So when you are no longer eating meat and animal products, you're going to automatically be eating more of these alternatives, which are much healthier for you. There actually seems to be some negative health effects of eating meat. Who knows if it's just meat itself or if it has to do with the conventional factory farming and how, like, the outcomes that they're having with their meat. But either way, many studies have shown that people who eat a vegetarian-based diet or vegan diet are getting more nutrients. They are lower weight, which means that this is a great way to help you to lose weight is by switching to vegetarianism or veganism. It's a great way to reduce or manage diabetes. In fact, there were 2 separate studies, one done in 2006, one done in 2009. And they found that the people who switched to a vegan diet were able to lower their blood sugar substantially more than the American Diabetes Association recommended diet. So think about that for a minute. The organization responsible for helping people to manage and reduce their diabetes is recommending a diet that is not as effective as just removing animal products from your diet. I mean, this is not rocket science, y'all. The answers are right there in front of you. If you are overweight, if you are in pain, if you are suffering, switch. Just try it. See how you feel. So if you don't want to go entirely vegan, maybe you want to try one of the vegetarian options. So there are pescatarians who eat fish, but they don't always eat like eggs or dairy. You could be lacto-vegetarian, which means you eat dairy but not the other things. There's ovo-vegetarian, which eats eggs, but not the other stuff. And there's lacto-ovo-vegetarian, which eats dairy and eggs, but not fish or meat. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this, and it doesn't matter what you call yourself, what you label yourself, if you fit into some box that somebody categorizes you as. I think that if you eat less meat tomorrow, if you eat less meat this week, and if you are just eating less and less to the point that hopefully you're not eating any at all, you're going to be making a dramatic impact on this world. Not only is this the only way we can quote unquote stick it to the man and these big factory farmers that are probably just slowly killing us and shortening our lives and making us fat, but you're also extending your own life. You're helping yourself to live a better life. They found that vegetarian diets can prevent cancer. It can lower your risk for heart disease, and it can even reduce pain. So what have you got to lose? Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of NexTalks. I'm Nex. I talked. I hope you liked it. I know it was a heavy subject this time, but if you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation, or if there's something else you'd like to hear me talk about, please leave it in the comments or reach out to me on social media. If you did like this episode and you like this podcast, please consider supporting on our website.